I'm going to go ahead and get started here, and people can join as they come in. Welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Scott McBride. I'm the consultant project manager for this. And before we get going any further, I'd like to introduce Josh Potter from Hennepin County to say a few words. Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you, Scott. Just good evening to everybody. Just thank you very much for your time and joining us this evening for our listening session. In particular, we're looking forward to hearing feedback and being able to answer questions that you may have tonight as related to this project moving forward. We are planning to introduce some corridor alternatives here this evening, and just grateful for the time that you've committed to joining us this evening. So thank you. I'm going to pass it back to Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And I will second that. I know spending a couple hours out of your precious evenings with us is a big deal. So we'll try to be efficient with our time and try to present you with a lot of information, but more importantly, hear what you have to say also. I will have a couple of co-presenters with me. Hyla Mays will be talking about our engagement process. Hyla's from Bolton and Mink, a principal planner. And Ross Tillman will be talking about some of the alternatives and some of the issues in the corridor. Ross is a principal engineer with Bolton and Mink also. We have plenty of other team members you will get to meet when we get to the breakout sessions I'll talk to about later. And we also have some agency staff from Minneapolis, from Metro Transit, from some other agency partners here as well. Go ahead and advance, Hyla. Of course, the requisite Zoom housekeeping rules. Please stay on mute during the presentation so that we don't have any distractions as we go through. We would love to answer questions real time. So if you have questions as we're going through the presentation, please feel free to use the chat box. We'll have staff monitoring that, and we'll try to answer things real time if we can there. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Although I mentioned earlier, we will have breakout sessions, so there will be a great opportunity for all the questions and comments you would like to make when we get to those breakout sessions. So again, please feel free to use the chat, and we'll try to tag along with you. Go ahead. Let's go through the next slide. This project is sponsored by a number of people. Hennepin County is the lead agency on this, but working in very close partnership with the city of Minneapolis, with Minneapolis Parks and Recreation, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail about later, with Metro Transit, of course, with all the transit facilities they have running through this area, and with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, which owns some of the roadways in this area as well. All of these groups are represented on the project management team, and all of these groups have been here from the beginning as we have gone through this. So what we will be doing today in the meeting, if you want to advance, we've really got two things we're going to do. One is a presentation right up front. We'll try to keep that to about 35 to 40 minutes so that we've got plenty of time for comments and questions. We'll start out with just a little bit of the background of this corridor, how we got to where we are now. We'll get into some of the engagement to date. We've been out in the community gathering a lot of feedback. So we'll talk about that process and what we've been hearing from the community. And then importantly, we'll go through some of the technical work that we've done. And as Josh noted, we will show the corridor concepts, the two corridor concepts we're moving forward with, kind of how we got there and what those are, and what some of the issues are associated with those. And then the second part of it is we'll have a 20-minute group discussion where we'll break out into smaller groups. And we hope to have, small groups of hopefully 8 to 12 people that we can have a good dialogue. And we'll moderate those with some of our staff. We'll record the answers in there and come back and do a little report out so that everybody gets the benefit of what happened in the group discussion in the other groups as well. So next slide. So a little bit of the overview of the project. So the background, if you've lived or worked in this area for very long, you've heard about potential improvements in this on First and Hennepin for quite a while. In 2016, there was a very technical study that was done, really pretty extensive, that looked at concepts developed that would accommodate all users, whether you're rolling, walking, biking, using transit, using an automobile. It was pretty extensive. That study in 2016 did not come down and result in a single recommendation. And importantly, a lot of those concepts to do those full types of improvements would have required full reconstruction of both First and Hennepin in order to accommodate some of those bigger visions. And if you next slide, Hyla. And in 2018, the city and county moved forward with the implementation of a bike lane on First and Hennepin. They requested and fortunately received $5.5 million in federal funding, looking at a 2023 fiscal year construction project. And the scope of that funding application and successful funding application was to install bike lanes on First and Hennepin through this area, which I'll get to the area here in just a second. Look at pedestrian improvements like bump outs, accessible pedestrian ramps, making sure it's ADA compliant, and looking at traffic signal upgrades, replacing some of the aging traffic signals and including accessible pedestrian signals in those. And importantly, the scope of this project that we're embarking on today is a retrofit. And by that, I mean, it's not a full reconstruction of the road. We will try to leave as much of the roadway intact as we can. It is to do these improvements: the bike lane, accessibility, and signal upgrades. So the project area that we have that we're working in today and was part of that application is First Avenue and Hennepin Avenue. You see the Mississippi River down on the bottom left of the corner of the photo there. And in the top right where they come together is where First and Hennepin come together. So the corridor area is on First Avenue and Hennepin Avenue from Main Street up to where it comes together, and then a little bit further to 8th Street. I'm sure you all recognize that this really is quite a vibrant, robust corridor. It's really the gateway to Northeast and the northern suburbs coming out of downtown Minneapolis. And there's a lot of local, regional, statewide transportation connections that happen here, both in all modes, both walking, transit, biking, automobiles. And since the last open house that we had, this is our second listening session, we've actually added an element. You see the yellow line down on Main Street at the bottom left of the map. In cooperation with the Park Board, Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, Hennepin County has agreed to undertake construction of the seam, it's called, project as part of this. There's a gap in the trail system in that 1 block stretch between First and Hennepin. And so we're currently working with the Park Board to add that to this project. So I think that's a real benefit and a real good example of cooperation between agencies to get something done. Next slide. So our project is more limited in scope to the 2016 effort, and that is to be consistent with the requirements of the Federal Highway Administration that administers the funding that we've received for this project. We are exploring a range of options. We have explored a range of options that meet those requirements, but I do want to note that it is currently limited by, again, it's more of a retrofit project as opposed to a full reconstruction project. So the schedule that we're on right now, we are in the planning phase, which is the purple phase at the beginning. We started back in 2020. And we're now towards the end of 2021. If you look at the inset or the blue arrow, we completed phase 1, looking at the existing conditions, asking the community what vision they would like to have for the corridor. And we are now at the end of that phase 2, where we've developed, we've tested, we've evaluated a number of corridor concepts, and we're about to move into phase 3, which would be, we are launching right now about a 30-day engagement window where we'll tell people what the alternatives are, the two options that we have. We'll get feedback on those for the next 30 days. And at the end of that, we'll look at selecting one of those alternatives based on that feedback, and then going into a little bit more preliminary design of that. If you go back up to the main timeline and design, what comes after that, starting in early 2022, we will start the design process through 2023, and construction is anticipated to be in 2024. And that does line up with the E-line construction as well. So there are some benefits associated with that. We do anticipate that that will be a 1-year construction period. So let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, Anna. The project goals that we started out with here are some fairly common goals for the city and the county. Safety and accessibility, safety of everyone that travels in this corridor, no matter the mode. Accessible transportation as well, making sure we're compliant with ADA rules and regulations, and connecting all modes. There's a robust trail system, robust sidewalk system, robust transit system, and roadway system in here, just making sure that we have that multimodal connectivity here. And then just trying to satisfy goals of active living and health that are within the community as well. All the while, we want to make sure that, again, this is a very vibrant business area, vibrant residential area as well. And so we want to support the land use that is there. We want to support the economic development that is there right now and support the businesses that are in the area. And so next slide. So now we want to turn to Hyla, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the engagement that has happened in the past and the results of that.
Thanks, Scott. As mentioned earlier, we really are very glad to be part of this conversation with you, because this ultimately is in the hands of the community. This is where you live, work, and play, and we want to make sure that as solutions are being developed, they're reflective of what's most important to the people here. I will not go into detail in our scope for engagement. It's been sort of a multi-part piece, and as many of you I'm sure appreciate, it certainly isn't how we originally thought it might be prior to COVID. Some of the tools you see here have been used throughout this process to gather input. There's been a heavier emphasis on like this remote engagement than anticipated, but certainly we've attempted to reach out as thoroughly as we can, and we of course are not quite done yet. I do want to call out that we have a couple of great partners on this. One represented on the call, New Publica, Mark Valencia and his team, and Whit Siasoko, who is a local artist, have been helping us think creatively and outside the box in terms of doing some engagement in this area, with a special focus on those who are less likely to be involved and have been historically underrepresented in the process. You see here the timing of this. We had an open house last fall, winter, and this spring there was some pop-up and interactive engagement. This fall, again, here we are with alternatives, and again, transitioning to the winter, we're working towards getting a final one, consistent with the schedule outlined earlier. The sort of phase 1 engagement, which was kind of the first big chunk, we're kind of still in phase 2 right now, was really a series of efforts to get people to get out there and to have a really good picture of what people are looking for in the area, to understand what's on the ground, understand what's in people's minds, and what issues are most important. In the following slides, you'll hear from what we did in terms of feedback. This you're just looking at now is a summary of some of the types of engagement and ways we collected information during this time period. There certainly have been efforts since then, but as the way we handle it, we gathered the first collection first, and that this informed the original scoping of improvements. This current phase is informing the sort of narrowing down of them. The work that's been done to date in this phase has been some additional neighborhood meetings. There's been work that has sort of folded in previous engagement along Main Street Trail, and some really great arts-based engagement with students at Marcy Open School. During time, due to, you see right here, an artist in residence who worked with them as well to assist with really bringing in some of the younger generation into this conversation. We know we don't expect many school children to be in a meeting like this, but we want to make sure that as we're planning for this, we're thinking about the most vulnerable users and those especially who are walking and biking, because as we've heard over again, you'll hear again from me in a minute, safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and others in the corridor who either cannot drive or choose not to is of paramount importance. We've had some different efforts to reach out. The pop-up engagement work that we had originally planned a little bit earlier is not so much, as we're looking out into the little blizzard outside, we're not going to be focused as much on outdoor activities, but certainly want to make sure we're continuing to get the word out, continuing to connect with people individually, and seeking out ways to connect. As I'm sure everyone appreciates, it's been a challenging time with some groups and some individuals during COVID, but we know that with some persistence, we can continue to seek out input.
No, looks like Hyla froze. All right. Looks like we lost her. I'm going to pull the presentation up and see if we can carry on. Okay, I think Hyla got through that one. So what actually did we hear out here? So when we talked about pedestrians, we essentially asked, how comfortable is your experience while walking and rolling on Hennepin and First Avenues? And you can see it's kind of a mixed bell curve, kind of leaning slightly towards the uncomfortable. Not quite half of the people said that it's fairly comfortable out there. Little more said, about the same number, said it's very uncomfortable to uncomfortable. The types of comments that we heard were about traffic safety at crossings, pedestrian lighting needs, and slowing traffic down out there so that it's more comfortable to walk, and then just the condition of the sidewalk.
Hey,
For
Scott,
biking, are you back?
I'm back. I'm sorry about that. My internet must have just dropped. It's wonderful that you were able to jump in so quickly.
No worries. You want to take over?
Sure. I am sorry about that, folks. I guess we had an internet hiccup here.
Yes, that is life in the digital world
Indeed
right
it
now.
is.
Go
It
ahead.
looks like there's a question in the chat. I'm sure someone can look at that. I'll go ahead and say, as I think Scott ably jumped in and talked about walking comments. Likewise, we asked in terms of both comfort level and need out there. One thing we found pretty consistently is nobody is super comfortable out on this corridor, which does not surprise us. We heard consistently, of course, a need for a dedicated lane for multiple reasons. Bikes being in traffic is unsafe, and bikes being on sidewalks with pedestrians is also unsafe, the more for pedestrians than the bicyclists. Separating bikes and walkers was key, especially in busy commercial districts. I think it's very common, as it is here, for bikes to be on the sidewalks, even though I think it's technically illegal. There's just a concern about the safety on there. We heard a lot about the 1st and 5th intersection, not just from bikes, but also from beds, of being an unsafe intersection to navigate, just due to lack of traffic control there and uncertainties about traffic speeds and volumes also being a high consideration for people who are attempting to bike this corridor. Driving comments. There's a concern along the lines of bad sight lines, especially at sort of the skewed intersections we'll talk about in a bit later. There's a need to ensure that people have a good view when they're traveling through the corridor. Traffic flow and speeding being considerations, both just sometimes speeds too fast, but also lack of traffic operational issues with some of the signals at key intersections, which I'm sure anyone who's driven through here can appreciate. Some confusion with intersections, especially around the triangle. And again, we have some proposed solutions around that front, and traffic signal timing for those of you tracking with it. It can be a little bit stop and go and various bottlenecks forming in the area. Next slide. Transit comments. Again, we had a note on this at the bottom. If you can see the fine print, one thing we thought was important to note is we didn't feel we were going to get a very representative sample of transit riders during this time period. Based on some information provided by Metro Transit, who's been an active partner throughout, ridership in this area declined about half during the pandemic, which was typical of many places. Actually, it was higher in some places than others, just based on the fact that people were not riding transit or that they were discouraged from riding transit due to health concerns. So we're not quite sure how representative this group is, but that said, we went with the people who showed up and certainly got some comments. Of course, when we were doing some of the survey work, it was during the winter. So whenever you do that, you get people asking about winter maintenance, the sidewalks and bus stops properly shoveled. There's always concerns during snowfall. Generally improvements to the bus stops. There's some pretty minimalist ones out there, even the ones with higher ridership. And there's certainly an opportunity in this project to rethink that. Better signage. There's a number of transfers in this area. It's the through routes, but also transfers and helping people to understand and navigate the system for wayfinding purposes. And also interest in a dedicated bike lane to provide a transit priority so that riding the bus does get a little bit more priority over general traffic. This sort of aggregating up from all the engagement discussions, these are some major themes we saw coming out of this. And our purpose of doing this was to say, not does this includes every single comment received, but the major themes tell us what we need to know about the priorities for developing solutions here. Safety and accessibility, first in a lot of people's minds. In addition to, of course, the safety of peds, bikes, and others using the space, accessibility is a larger concern. From some of the outreach, especially in the northern end of the corridor, where we have some communities of people with disabilities living, we know there's a lot of people navigating this space using mobility aids, wheelchairs, and other ways to get around. And it's not an ADA accessible system of sidewalks and crossings. That's something that needs to change, and certainly in any improvement plan will be a top priority. Active living and walkability. People choose to live here because they love to be able to walk to shops and restaurants, parks, the riverfront, and jobs. I want to make sure that this is consistent with an active lifestyle, that it's healthy, safe, comfortable, and enjoyable to walk and travel here. Serving planned growth. If you live in the area, you know that it's almost never been without construction for the past decade, with lots of new buildings coming up, including some right now. Making sure that the infrastructure is keeping pace with the city and others' investment in the area, and that with all the new residents, businesses, and others coming here, there's infrastructure that serves them well and really complements those private sector investments. So something responding to that and making sure that there's accommodation for the lifestyles there. Streetscape and public realm. We've heard from the neighborhoods particularly a lot of concern that there's a lot of gray out there. Some of the trees not doing so well, and definitely room for improvement on the stormwater front. This project we don't have all the solutions laid out today, but it's certainly part of the conversation for greening and making this more attractive in terms of the streetscape. Again, being a place that's more livable and walkable and supports a healthy business district. Business district report is a part of this. There's big questions about what that means because there's a lot of different angles to think about how businesses are accessed, what makes a healthy and comfortable place, what's attractive, and access for parking, buses, bikes, and other ways to travel here. Certainly consideration. And related to that, public parking needs. And how those are accommodated both on and off street. And we have some information on that as well. Okay, I think I'm turning back over to, let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, pull that back up.
Yep. I'll just click us up to where options for Hennepin and First. We're turning over to you, Scott, right?
It's Ross is doing this.
Okay.
Well, yep. Thank you, Hyla. And I hope I can hold true to Scott's claim for overall presentation time, but I'm a little skeptical. There's a lot of information here. What we're trying to do is kind of give you all the information that we can before we have our breakout rooms so we can have a good discussion. So there's going to be a lot coming your way, and we know that, I guess, but hopefully we can have a good conversation in the breakouts. So the big challenge in front of all of us was there's a lot of options out here. That previous study evaluated 88 different alternatives, and how do we effectively screen those options down to various concepts that could work within the scope of this project. And again, as Scott mentioned, we're more or less held to that retrofit scope, so that limits some of these options right away. Next slide, please. So we've gone through a screening process over the past several months to answer these key questions that are up on the slide. Does the concept fit within this project scope and corridor constraints? Does it meet high level needs for key travel modes? Does it address trade-offs based on priorities? And what we're coming to you with today are two alternatives that we feel like do check the boxes here. They're a little bit different, and we're looking for feedback on those before we select a preferred alternative to move forward with and refine. Next slide. So from a corridor, just overall considerations perspective, these items probably shouldn't be of surprise to those of you who live in the area, but there's obviously space limitations in an urban area with different modal priorities. And so we worked through, how do we fit these different modes into the corridors? How do they work together? Is there separation physically, or is it not quite a physical separation with more flexibility of use of space? We've considered ongoing maintenance needs as part of this as well. And then I think a key thought that we've had as part of this project is thinking about what we can do now as far as a retrofit project goes, and how can that project not preclude other things from happening in the future as well. So leading up to kind of sharing those two options we have today, we do have several different key topics that are worth some conversation. Those are shown here on the screen. These topics have been at the forefront really of our minds and kind of filtered into these two different concepts that we have. And so we wanted to share our thoughts with you regarding these. So the first being the one-way versus two-way roadway facility component here. The key issue really being how can one-way roadways be safe and livable? So the two concepts that we're sharing today retain the one-way paired roadway facilities. And what we've done is think about how can we improve accessibility. Scott mentioned ADA, different pedestrian components. Of course, we're talking about adding a bikeway here. Traffic calming certainly fits into that space of safe and livability. So our concepts have narrow lanes. We're proposing removing some channelized right turns on First Avenue, curb extensions where we can. Many of those improvements also address pedestrian safety. We also have a concept to share at the triangle intersection that checks that box as well. And then streetscape enhancements. That's one of those items that's an ongoing conversation. And right now we're looking for feedback from you all on what could be out here. Next slide. And kind of along those same lines, the city of Minneapolis has a nice set of street design guides and standards that kind of form a nice guide for our project team as well. And so those are context-based. Talk about separated bike facilities, wide sidewalks and boulevards based on context. Of course, dedicated bus lanes. One of our concepts does have a transit lane. So these are all concepts and different things being considered as we look at our two alternatives. Again, to make a one-way paired roadway facility a livable and safe environment. The regional trail connection, Hyla mentioned this and Scott did too, I believe. Since we've met the last time, issue came up about completing a gap in the regional riverfront trail. So that's along the Mississippi River. Right now there's a gap along Main Street between First and Hennepin, where that trail does not exist. And so in partnership with the park board, this project is incorporating what's being called the seam connection. The intent is to include a two-way multi-use facility on the river side of Main Street on that block to provide that regional and local connectivity and circulation. Next slide. And here's the general idea for that concept. This is shown on the layouts as well. But the top image is, of course, the existing condition there. You'd see the river's off to the left. That guardrail really protects the top of the slope going down to the river. And our concept on the bottom here, you can see the guardrail on the far left. We're more or less keeping the guardrail where it is and then moving the curb into some of that space on Main Street. There's a wide shoulder and wide lanes where that multi-use trail would go separated from the street. Green infrastructure is another one of those key topics. Again, this is something that we're considering now. We have some ideas on how to make the corridor greener and what some of those options could look like independently. Where we're going with that now is figuring out where those can be located as far as space goes on the corridor options and working with partners to figure out the details there. But from a stormwater treatment enhancement perspective, that's certainly a key here. Different plantings are being considered. And we are working in partnership with the watershed from an agency perspective to get their feedback and also potential for some funding as well. And if you've seen the layouts, these are some images from those. Again, just those examples of some things that could be done out here and where we're going to be taking the conversation next. The triangle intersection. So we did talk about this at the first listening session at a higher level, not necessarily the specific concept, but the fact that it is a known issue. So the triangle being the intersection between Hennepin, Central, and Fifth. There's essentially 3 signalized intersections operating more or less as one. And the main issue here was, how do we improve the safety and accessibility of that triangle intersection? And what we'll show next year is our take on a concept to do that, where we can improve pedestrian crossings, have safer and more efficient movements for all modes, and even provide a potential enhanced gateway feature area. And so Hyla switched over here to the top-down view. This is a very schematic drawing of what that could look like. And so that the key part here is the peninsula area, which extends off of the Hennepin development, which is shown on that little schematic drawing of that building is the Hennepin development being built right now. And the improvement that we're proposing here extends through 5th Street out to where the existing concrete refuge island is. This is a very complicated intersection. There's a lot of different conflicts, a lot of different paths for vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists to take. And doing this in terms of putting the triangle through 5th Street alleviates a lot of those conflicts. Another feature here in terms of safety is a proposed median on Central. That's shown by that dark black line. Again, that would restrict some turning movements to and from Central from 5th. All 3 intersections are proposed to remain signalized to some degree. If you're walking or biking, especially along 5th, your route doesn't change. So that's an important feature here, that you still walk along 5th into that triangle area and continue north or south, or biking if you're doing that. Next slide. So here's a rendering of what this could look like. Just a couple notes on this, that again, that Hennepin development, the building profile is that white blob on the right. And this is just a take on what it could look like. One of the key things we're looking for feedback on today is the streetscaping side of things, the green infrastructure. So what's shown here in the rendering is not intended to be exactly what's built. It's just an idea that was what we could do as far as a visualization goes. And so again, the intent here is to provide a nice plaza area for pedestrians and bicyclists as they're crossing 5th, or if they're traveling along Hennepin or Central to stop at. Could be a gateway feature for the neighborhood or community, and just provides an added layer of safety for those users. I mentioned the intersection is quite complex, and I think everyone's aware of that if you travel through it. Currently today, there's quite a few different conflict points for vehicles. And so when we talk about conflict points, it's where could collisions occur, where paths cross each other. So right now there's 58 motor vehicle conflict points. That proposed solution drops it down to 16. So that's quite the reduction in conflicts of 72%. And that would lead to a reduced amount of crashes. On the pedestrian side, again, we're looking at conflicts in those reductions. So Hyla, if you want to go on, thank you. There's currently 35 pedestrian conflict points. That would get down to 21 with this improvement in place. That's a 40% reduction. So again, we're making it easier to cross. There's less potential conflicts to have to be aware of. And if you're biking through the intersection, you know, it's certainly going to be safer as well. The amount of conflict points just kind of depends on how you're riding the intersection. So probably somewhere in between as far as the reduction goes, but certainly an improvement for bicyclists as well. Managing curbside space. How do we effectively balance demands for curbside space? And things that we're talking about in our concepts are transit facilities, whether that's stations or transit lanes. There's on-street parking, of course, in the area, and drop off loading and deliveries as well. And so what we did as part of this study, Hyla, is we did conduct a parking study this fall to get some utilization information. That's what's shown here on the screen. It is color coded, so the kind of the black lines are areas where there is no on-street parking. The orange line are areas where the parking is highly utilized, so less than 30% of the parking is available. The light blue is kind of in between. That's 30 to 60% is available. And the purplish color are block faces where more than 60% of the spaces are available on average. This is the weekday. Main takeaways here, of course, on Hennepin and First. The utilization on the weekday is in that orange and light blue, so less than 30% for a couple block faces, and most of them are between 30 and 60% available. The cross streets here, we also did survey those. Those tend to be more available than the parking along Hennepin and First. Next slide, please. We also looked at weekend, same information, a little more utilization on Hennepin on the weekend, which makes sense. There's a lot of business traffic in that area. But again, the side streets tend to be less utilized on the weekend as well. So you see a lot of block faces on the side streets that are that light blue or that purplish color. And the last kind of key topic here was accommodating transit. So we talked about E-line BRT. Scott mentioned the construction years overlap. That's coming through this corridor. There will be 2 stations within this corridor, both at Second. So University and Second, and First and Second, or Hennepin and Second and First and Second, excuse me. We are looking at dedicated transit lanes in one of our concepts. And in both concepts, we are looking at improving local bus stops as well. So what's shown in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen is an example of what an improved local bus stop could look like that floats away from the sidewalk and separates bikes from pedestrians and those waiting for buses. Next slide. And just a kind of an FYI slide for those who haven't seen a BRT station before. This just gives you an idea of what above ground elements are typically part of those stations. So again, First and Second and Hennepin and Second to where the BRT stations will be. All right, now finally getting to the concept. So all that taken into account, how do we optimize benefits within the scope we have? And we're looking at, of course, adding the bike facility, curbside management is key, integrating transit, and providing that long-term flexibility again. As we developed our concepts, we did account for a variety of different criteria that we use to evaluate these. And we'll share that evaluation at the end here. These 8 criteria kind of encompass a wide realm of different topics, but focusing on health and safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, the business district, motor vehicles, and also just making sure that the concept is not only sustainable, but something that's implementable as well. All right, so what we're going to show here are the cross sections of our different concepts. Just a side note, these are shown on Hennepin Second to University. There really isn't a lot of typical sections along these corridors. It changes quite a bit. So the layouts, of course, show the full picture a little bit more clearly, but this is showing the general nature of the concept. So existing 3 travel lanes in each direction, 2 parking lanes, so 1 on each side, and of course, no bike facility. And in this area, there's about 12 feet of sidewalk space behind both curbs on each side. Next slide. So concept 1 we have here, this is more or less in line with the federal funding application that was prepared. And so our team took that concept and put a little more detail and thought into that for concept 1. That retains 3 travel lanes. 1 parking lane is retained on the left side. For the most part, the parking on the right side is removed for installation of the bike lane. So in this case, the bike lane is a street level bike lane that's buffered from vehicle traffic. And on the next slide, we have a rendering of what this could look like again in that same area of the corridor. You'll see those 3 travel lanes and the bike lane against the right curb with that paint buffer. Next slide. So I mentioned we did look at utilization for parking, of course, with this concept here, with the bikeway on the right side, that does impact parking. You'll see here on the map, the locations where parking is lost. I see there was a comment about that. This equates to 72 stalls on street between Hennepin and First. That's about 15% of the on-street parking stalls in this general area. So that area is along both Hennepin and First, and then those cross streets that have good access as well. Concept 2, this one's a little bit different. It retains 2 general travel lanes. The rightmost lane is converted to a transit lane and or a lane where people can turn right from. 1 parking lane again is retained on the left side, and on the right side where parking was, a separated bike lane is proposed. And so if you skip to the rendering highlight, I think it shows that a little more clearly what that bike lane and the separation could look like. So in this case, there'd be some sort of curb separation, a vertical element with the transit lane immediately to the left, and then the 2 travel lanes. Similar to concept 1, this concept also results in parking loss on Hennepin and First. This one's slightly more, it's 86 stalls. There's a couple areas where having that physical barrier between the bike lane and the transit lane prevents parking, where the concept 1 could retain it. So 86 stalls last year, that's about 17% stall loss for on-street parking in the area. And then to sum it all up, our team did prepare an evaluation. This is a summary of that evaluation here. Again, those 8 goals are on the left. And then we have concept 1, concept 2, as well as no build. So the kind of the existing situation out there now. I'll kind of run through each one of these and just explain some of the differentiators and why the rankings are such. So from an equity, health, and safety perspective, both concept 1 and 2, certainly enhance ped facilities. They install bike facilities. Concept 2 does have what we would consider a better or more robust bike facility constructed. It also provides more transit advantages through reliability with the transit lane. So those align with agency goals and policies. On the pedestrian facility side of things, both concept 1 and 2 incorporate ADA compliance, curb extensions, accessible pedestrian signals, the triangle improvements that we showed, channelized right turn lane removals that I mentioned. We're also proposing adding sidewalk on the north side of Hennepin between Main and 2nd. All that is in both of our concepts. So both of those got the same good ranking. On the bike infrastructure side, like I mentioned previously, concept 2 has that separated bike facility, whereas concept 1 has that buffered on-street bike facility. So from our perspective, and in the context of this corridor, for people all ages and abilities, that separation is key. And so that received that good ranking versus fair for concept 1. On the transit service side, I think this should probably be obvious, but both concepts do have enhanced transit stops, like I mentioned, where we can. They're both compatible with the E-line. However, concept 2 has the increased reliability coming from that transit lane integration. On the public realm side, both concept 1 and 2 provide opportunity areas for green infrastructure. So something that our team's going to be looking at in more detail after this meeting, and especially after we get input from everyone here. The difference here being that concept 2 provides more of a buffer between most of the traffic on the roadway and all of the uses kind of behind the curbs for the public realm. From a safe vehicle traffic operations perspective, both of our concepts reduce a lot of conflicts at the triangle. Both resolve confusing lane continuity issues along First Avenue that occur now approaching Main Street. So that's something you could see on the layout. The right lane now drops as a right turn lane, and a left lane is added on the left side of the road. These concepts resolve that continuity issue. From the business district perspective, the no build concept retains the parking that's there today. The difference then between that and our concepts is comparing both concept 1 and concept 2 reduce parking, but increase accessibility for customers and workers via different modes. So improved access via transit, bicycling, and walking as well. And then lastly, on the sustainability and implementation side of this, both concept 1 and concept 2 have limited right-of-way impacts anticipated. Concept 1, from a sustainability perspective and long-term costs, likely has slightly less ongoing maintenance needs considering how the bikeway is constructed. And concept 2 has slightly higher cost. at this point, capital cost upfront. Although both of these are considered feasible options by the funding partners. So lastly, we have some remaining decision points, and we'd love to hear input from folks today. Bikeway type is obviously a key difference between the concepts. Transit lane integration, it's in one of the concepts, not in one of the others. Streetscape priorities, again, we're not there yet in terms of identifying locations for that. We'd love to hear input today. That's the next step our team's going to take. Coordination with other projects in the area. And there's a lot going on in the area. And lastly, talking about on-street parking impacts. So with that, I think Scott might describe what's going to happen next.
So before we move on from there, we're getting a few questions in here that I think everybody would benefit from before we move into the breakout rooms, which we can talk in more detail there as well. Just about the number of lanes that are out there today, the 3 lanes. The 2 options that we've shown today are keeping the 3 lanes and removing a lane of parking, keeping the 3 lanes with 2 travel lanes and 1 transit lane. So in other words, going down to 2 lanes of traffic, plus removing the parking in certain locations. And so we're getting questions like, can we go down to 1, can we reduce 1 more lane in order to add parking back in, which to me leads to a scenario of either no transit lane and 2 travel lanes, or a scenario of 1 travel lane and 1 transit lane. So we've talked about all of those in our project management team, and we've done quite a bit of traffic analysis. The traffic analysis, I'll just talk at a high level, and we can get into more detail perhaps in our breakout rooms. The traffic analysis shows that we can successfully move traffic through this corridor in 2 traffic lanes. To do less than that gets to be considerably tougher. And the county is interested in keeping those 2 lanes of traffic flowing. And we're considering it to be a pretty high priority between the 2 agencies in particular, well, all 3 agencies, Metro Transit, Minneapolis, and Hennepin County to implement a transit lane here as well, which brings us back to the 3 lane scenario. So at a high level, that's kind of where we're at with this. We don't anticipate the ability to go down from those 3 lanes with those scenarios to take a lane of parking away. I'll say, is that a fair assessment? I'll pitch that to Ross, Josh, Heather about the traffic analysis. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, Scott, this is Josh from Hennepin County. That's a very good assessment. I'll note as well, there's been a number of questions too, of course, just of how long it will take to travel through the area. And one of the key items here is really that triangle at Central Hennepin and Fifth, and really cleaning that area up, not only from a safety perspective, but also as well, that is where a significant amount of the delay for all users comes in. So whether you're walking in transit or as well in a vehicle, and so really working through those intersections, that triangle area there does, we have found that the travel times will be equal to, and actually at times better than what's out there today, with that opportunity to clean up that intersection. So not only from a safety perspective, but also as well traveling through the corridor, that intersection really is a bottleneck in the area. So cleaning up that triangle area really does just help keep everybody moving. And as well, one of the reasons, as shown as an opportunity here, to clean that up from a safety perspective as well. The other thing I want to note just as well too is certainly from both city and county and the agencies, policies certainly geared towards continuing to provide opportunities for climate action and addressing those, as well as providing appropriate facilities for all modes, those walking, biking, transit, and in vehicles. And so part of, as Scott noted, there's certainly limited space in these streets. There's a very limited budget to this project. And so trying to focus on delivering the goals of that people have for in the area, as well as these overarching policy goals as well. And that's reflected in these concepts as well.
Okay. I'm debating whether or not we want to get into more actual traffic numbers here in the larger group. I tell you what, let's go to breakout sessions, and we'll be able to address some of these questions in those breakout sessions. We intend to come back, report out, and just finish up with a slide or two to finish, and we'll be around after that as well to have some more detailed conversations for those that want to have them. So we're willing to stick around and have those. And so I'd like to get into the breakout sessions, and we'll talk about some of these things in detail. So you should see a invitation to join a breakout room coming up. So hit the join button, and we'll see you in those rooms. "20 minutes is clearly not enough time to work through all these complex issues, is it? Couple of things that I want to note. We already have the concept layouts up on the website now. So you are free to, at your leisure, go in and really thoroughly comb through those layouts. We love it if you can provide comments on there. Of course, we're recording comments here. We're taking notes. We've got the chat comments, and we will get to record those. But we'd love you to get on and really make your voice known on the website. There we can kind of get some community conversation going as well. You got the opportunity to like people's comments and or not like them, and kind of get a little, of course, civil discourse going on those websites. So please feel free to look at that. We will have this presentation up on the website as well once we get it the recording done. We will have the PowerPoint presentation up on the website, so there will be a lot of resources, typical sections, things like that. A lot of resources on the website for you to, again, at your own pace, be able to go through that information. So let's do a little reporting out of what we heard. I'll start out with my scattered notes. We had a lot of good conversation, and a few of the things that came up here is kind of the age-old bikes versus loading zone trucks that happens, and so take that into account. A lot of support for business in our group. So we talked about business and parking, the impact that parking has on the businesses, and again, if we don't have space to allow freight to do what freight needs to do for business, they can take up, if it's a painted bike lane, they can just take up the bike lane, and so there are issues with that. Talked a little bit about 3 lanes of traffic and what an impediment that is to crossing a street, even if that one of the 3 lanes is a transit lane. It's still very wide. We spent a little bit of time on the Main Avenue area, and talked about the First Avenue southbound free right to Main, kind of that sweeping right before you get to the bridge, that sweeping free right. And both concepts do address that and bring it to a more kind of a more normal right turn lane there. Talked a little bit about the median and other infrastructure. Is there an ability to green up the corridor? The free right that I mentioned earlier provides a lot of space back that used to be roadway. Is that an opportunity for something green in the corridor? There's a wide median on Main. Is that an opportunity also to do something to green up the corridor? But it's good to see you again, Mr. Bourne. Happy to see you're here. Thanks for coming. And we had a bit other wide-ranging conversations, but those were the highlights. Josh, did I miss anything there?
Great summary, Scott. Thank you.
All right. Let's go to the second group. Ross, how about your group?
Well, I'm actually gonna let Kelsey start because she said she has a page of notes, so more than I've got.
All right.
Some good conversations went on in our group. I'll try to summarize the gist of things, but I'm not going to get all the points. There was, I would say, good broad support for the triangle change, a lot of safety improvements seen through that change, but also some concerns that there'll be some more left turns off of Central that will be needed because of that change to the triangle. So asking about some of the phasing along Central to make sure that people are able to access the businesses that they're trying to get to in the neighborhood. Some support for the dedicated bus lane, just knowing that if transit is efficient along the corridor, it will encourage more people to use it and potentially see higher ridership along that corridor. There were some noted concerns with some of the parking losses, especially adjacent to some businesses kind of towards the eastern end of the corridor. So some concern with seeing those go away, and wanted to talk more about that. A little bit of talk about connections with the bikeway, how there's not a lot of corridors going across the river that lead directly into here to get bicyclists on. Some support for seeing bike facilities or bikers on some of the smaller routes rather than on these major routes, but noting that this is a pretty primary corridor for connecting to other facilities and into downtown and to the east as well. So a range of comments, but really a good conversation. So I was happy to have the opportunity to hear folks see what they say.
Thanks, Kelsey. How about Hyla, Heather?
Sure. I'm going to get started, but I'm sure Heather can add to it as well. We had a great group. I was actually telling our team beforehand that I love working in this neighborhood because we have such good critical thinkers, very thoughtful people here who are bringing a really sharp eye to this and really challenging assumptions and asking good questions. So this group is not disappointing at all. I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. I would say from the get-go, we have answers and good answers to the questions being raised, but there's certainly more opportunities to share information further for those who want a deeper dive, like to see the numbers and want to get more into the details. That's not for everybody, but certainly will be in the interest of transparency, making that available. So this is a partial answer, but I think there'll be some more questions to follow up with after the fact. We heard from several different people in our group. I'll just run quickly through some of the points, and then again, we'll fill in any gaps. We heard about some importance of a dedicated transit lane for those who value transit through this area, making it as appealing choice as possible, with the idea that as a transit priority, it makes it more attractive in terms of transit speeds and as an alternative mode to driving around. The idea of having a protected bike lane with a curb being an important priority for those who want to bike, especially with young children or others who might be less confident bicyclists. Traffic speeds and volumes can be intimidating, and that provides an extra buffer of safety as is intended to do so. Without that type of barrier, it either reduces the risk of the ability for people to bike in general, or encourages them to go on the sidewalk, which can lead to other issues, and we've certainly heard that as well. We did have a lot of questions from several of our members about the traffic analysis, the details of the traffic analysis, and frankly, maybe the conclusion, which some might find counterintuitive, that you can reduce traffic lanes and some throughput, but still have improved operations and flow through the area due to improvements to the intersections, reduction of conflict points, and sort of signal changes. There is some analysis that supports this, and Heather can get into the details of our traffic analysis in the room. But certainly, we want to assure people that there has been analysis to support that. Had some good back and forth in terms of what that is. Of course, for those of you in the area, it's reason to understand and the need to have a close look, since the current traffic situation can be challenging for people, for those driving or for those attempting to navigate the traffic on other modes. As a result, there was some skepticism of whether that with the modes and the options portrayed would indeed deliver the results because of concerns about how they function now and the complexity of the network right now. There was questions also about, let's see, just going down here, relationship between the triangle and the other area on the other portions of the corridor in terms of the operations, what that will change and what that will not, wanting to understand that better. understanding what does acceptable traffic flow mean, and also understanding the forecast, how traffic was forecasted, what are the assumptions about mode split in terms of increased transit usage and other modes, and other factors that are used to as inputs to determine the results. With, of course, the caveat that is there's no perfect analysis. We also did hear that the traffic is variable. It's not always bad in the neighborhood, and there may be alleviated. There may be some concerns that sometimes it might be a bit skewed in terms of perspective on traffic because the closure of Third Avenue Bridge and other construction in the area has forced traffic into different routes than it might be otherwise. So the thought that maybe some changes in construction staging could change traffic flows as well. The people who use transit, again, appreciate the benefit of an improved transit system. Mentioning there, of course, is construction, not just in the roadways, but from housing in the area. And some questions about that. Also, a question that we did not, I don't think we had maybe as full an answer as we could to, which is I think we can, after Heather fills in, sort of bat over to the room in terms of the location of the bus, decision around the location of the bus stop at First and Second, if that was the appropriate location or if there was a better suited location. Heather, what did I miss?
It was also shared that there was an appreciation for concept 2 by a couple of the people because of the protected elements to help slow vehicles, and it would be more comfortable if vehicles were traveling at a slower speed to bike, walk, take transit, and in particular with small children living in the neighborhood, traveling to daycare, crossing the street, going to grocery store, etc. More comfortable to be a transit user, and having dedicated transit lane was appealing to a transit user. Specific to that question related to the transit stop on First Avenue, it was the far side stop at First and Second. And I thought maybe Cody could weigh in. I didn't know if it was an issue of the adequate width needed for that transit stop and why it was far side versus near side. At First and Second, the question was posed as to why we were shifting the stop from near side to far side. And I thought it might be because of the width needed for the stop with the bikeway through it, but thought maybe you could better respond.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. The primary objective of putting it far side is the preference of BRT. They prefer with signal operation to be on the far side of intersections. That being said, it's not impossible to put it near side. And I'd have to, I don't know that we've looked at the geometrics of putting it near side and how that would work with the existing infrastructure, but I know that Hennepin County and Metro Transit and locals in the neighborhood have been talking about the potential of taking a second look at that particular location to see if there's something that's maybe better suited. So I don't know, Josh, if you have any more information on that piece of it, we'll just toss it around the group.
No, Cody, I think you had a very good summary, and certainly as well, we've received feedback from particularly some of the adjacent residents to that BRT station. So certainly there'll be more conversation about that as well in the future, and particularly as well with Metro Transit and those residents in the area. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think the concern was expressed, Josh, based on the driveway location being at the end of that stop location. And concern about potential conflicts in sight lines, et cetera.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is the perfect time to be having that conversation, so we appreciate the perspective. So that group gets my vote as the deep dive into data so far group. So, and
I'll just give a really high level, quick explanation of the situation with improved operation or not declining operation with the travel lanes. And I think Josh kind of touched on it earlier, but just for the broader group, and certainly for those who are interested in a little more detail, we can provide it as Hyla said. But eliminating that leg of Fifth at that intersection does eliminate a traffic signal phase, which is time within a traffic signal phase. So that time that people are stopped at a red light now goes to Central and goes to Hennepin. So getting that time back to those other legs means that they're no longer delayed in that time. So it helps them flow more readily and more quickly through those intersections without as much delay. So that improves that operation and lets that, or keeps that queue from building like it does today. That five-leg intersection is considered a bottleneck right now, but eliminating that fifth leg of Fifth removes that additional time needed and gives it back to those other two streets. So
Yeah,
that's my
thanks, Heather.
simple explanation. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's worth noting it gives it back to all modes as well, the bikes, walkers, and vehicles. So let's go to the fourth group. Colin, Cody, you want to take off?
Yes. Thanks, Scott. Happy to share what our group talked about. We talked about an interest in keeping the businesses along First and Hennepin healthy, the stores, the restaurants, the service and access to those locations, getting people in and out. Also a concern about the loss of parking impacting the local businesses. And at the same time, an interest in the economic impact of having more foot and bike traffic. Similar to the previous group, at the intersection of Second and First at the Village Lofts, lots of active walkers, bikers, transit users, people who drive at this location. However, the location of the E-line BRT, there's some concern with this location that was expressed in our group. We'd like to consider locations further up first for consideration. Again, love the E-line, but just some specific concern about that location. And also the vehicles that are delivering goods to this building are currently in that location of that E-line platform. And the concern with the proximity to the parking access at that location as well. At the same time, expressing having really great meetings with Metro Transit and Hennepin County, appreciates representatives coming out to walk the block, see operations in person, observe. So hopeful to find potential alternative that, again, lots of neighbors will use. There's a note about the appreciation of the biking, transit, and walking focus, and specifically appreciate how the weighting of these project priorities are reflected in the options that are being shown. Appreciate how the cross-section is showing these design choices as priorities. And additionally, if the goals are to get that mode shift and slow down vehicles so that people feel safer, then a note that transit lanes should hopefully be able to add to this goal as well. Related to traffic, it was noted that it feels like it may get congested without 3 lanes of general traffic. But as Heather noted right now, Cody was also talking about the removal of the extra signal phase at Fifth and doing the triangle improvements will help to mitigate that. And related to the triangle area, a note that this is a bold vision and that it will hopefully add to the overall livability and safety for all people, including people in vehicles. And again, appreciating the triangle area and also wanting to prioritize filling the gap between Hennepin and First, or the scene connection. Cody, anything else you'd add to that?
No, I think you nailed it, Colin.
Thanks. I think that was all 4, right? That was all 4 groups. So bottom line is, as I listen to those report outs and I watch the very civil discourse going in the chat, this is why we do this, because we're hearing things that are really important to residents, really important to businesses out there, and also we're getting different perspectives of that. And so that's exactly what we want to hear. It doesn't make our job any easier that there may be a differing perspectives, but but we know that there are out there, and it's good to get those recorded, and it's good to really have that conversation, and we appreciate that. Tell you what we'll do. We've got, I think, just maybe one more slide that I'll run through just about next steps, and then we'll wind up the formal part of this. Those that can leave, I can't imagine you have anything better to do than this on a night, but those that have other things to do, feel free to leave. If you want to stick around for a while and have some more conversation, we're happy to do that. So if you want to pull up the next steps, thanks, Hyla. Really, so I mentioned earlier, we're at the point now where we're looking at the two concepts that we have. Mentioned their layouts, more detailed layouts that are online that you can go to and really get into the details such as we have them, because we are still up at the high concept level. We're launching now about a 30-day window of engagement. We're touching base with, we've already touched base with the Hennepin County Active Transportation Committee. We've hit the Minneapolis Bicycle Advisory Committee. Tomorrow is the Minneapolis Pedestrian Advisory Committee. We're hitting all 5 to 6 neighborhood organizations in this area. I think we've been to 1 or 2 already. We've got several more coming up, and we will. So we're trying to hit not just the residents in the area, but all these various neighborhood organizations. We are going to have some targeted outreach as well. As Hyla noted earlier, as weather permits, we'll be out in the corridor and trying to talk to business owners as we can. So what we'll do at this point, after that 30 days, we'll gather that engagement. We'll really collect it, tally it, try to figure out exactly what the community is saying, and select one of the alternatives that we have available. And then we'll start to refine that design over the next few months. And we would hope to be back to a group like this, and again with another round of engagement early in 2022. I'll say the first quarter of 2022, we'll be back to update and let you know exactly what we heard and how we responded to that, and then again get your feedback on that. So those are the next steps for the process, at least in the immediate future. And I think we talked about the overall schedule earlier. So we've got some contact information, I think, as well, perhaps. And like I say, we are more than willing to stick around for a while and talk to people. But again, this does conclude the formal piece of this. And what I'll do is I'll just open it up at this point. We can feel free to keep the chat going, and feel free to make comments. Go ahead.
I saw someone's hand raised earlier to that. Was that a mistake?
I was just clapping to say thank you.
Oh, okay.
But I would like to say, I mean, federal regional solicitations are not easy to come by. And they are meant for bicycle lanes and pedestrian improvements from the federal dollars, not from state or county or city dollars. So, bike lanes are coming. So that's what the money's for. So I just want to kind of take a step back with that. But I think it's going to be nice.
Thank you.
So I just like to say that I also think that the addition of the triangle area is a really interesting and novel concept to introduce to this area. I think it has a lot of aesthetic value, and potentially, the traffic aspects of it, I think, need further explanation. It wasn't until we got into this breakout that I was told that it was really the fact that the triangle was being put in there that was going to change the flow of traffic. If you really want to put that dedicated bus lane in there, you've got to come up with a better way of explaining it to people. because on the surface, it just doesn't seem possible. I mean, you really have to show people diagrammatically and with some numbers exactly how putting that triangle and reconfiguring those intersections is really going to change the flow enough. Because, you know, I can just tell you in the morning and in the evening, the traffic is dense, obviously pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. And for us, I guess, you know, putting it on my own little personal piece of turf, pulling out of our driveway from the village lofts, in particular, if you want to make a left-hand turn to get across those lanes to turn left onto Main, is a tricky maneuver in the best of times. And if you're really gonna put that bus lane in there and reduce and potentially constrict traffic more, you're gonna definitely make life a lot more difficult and dangerous for those of us who live in the village lofts pulling out of that driveway. Because it's just gonna be a more difficult, we're right there at the pinch point. I mean, we are right there at the place where the traffic is the most dense because it's right before the bridge. And moving that bus stop upstream is, I think, obviously of importance to us because it's a real safety issue. You know, if we have to look to the left for visibility to make that you're just making that right-hand turn when you got buses standing there and people milling around in that stop, that's going to be a really difficult and dangerous circumstance for us. And it's not only us that's going to get hit, it's going to be the people coming along the street, right? It's not just our skin. The best that we try and get out from that driveway, it's going to be the other people, and it could be a really serious accident with all the traffic that is there. So I really implore you to consider moving that bus stop upstream someplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Other comments, questions?
If I may.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, John Dietrich.
Thanks, John.
150 Second Street Northeast. This area was designed and master planned as part of a livable community. Bus stops were located on First, on Hennepin, on 2nd Street. And the corner of the village lofts already has one bus stop on it, 2nd Street. The townhomes of the village lofts has 2 bus stops. Those bus stops were there when that community building was built. They knew what they were getting into. They knew there was a bus stop. I think if you're interested in my opinion to be equitable to the property owners who live here, who pay the taxes, that the bus stops should remain where they are today so that it is not an added burden to one property versus the other. Things were developed, people invested with a system that was in place. And I believe there is adequate capacity and placement to put bus stops in. If you need to expand it to a BRT, I question in this area where you have a grid system and traffic signals every block, you're not going to be picking up time going through here. It's an urban corridor. Bus traffic in here works great today. Keep the bus stops where they are, maintain the visibility to the village lofts driveway, avoid accidents that will come. And I think we have a system that can work, but work within the system that we have in place. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. We've certainly heard that message loud and clear here. And our job as the project management team is to take that input, get together. Metro Transit is part of that. You know, these are Metro Transit bus stops. So we'll work with Metro Transit and consider that in light of everything else we have here. And we absolutely understand the issue. And I saw Michael's hand up. Is that right? Michael, did
No,
you have
I
something?
just saw the speaker's hand was up and I thought it was mine. So
Okay,
no problem.
no worries. The question in here about the semaphore at 5th and First. Josh, you wanna take a swing at that?
Yeah, certainly, Scott. That's a good question. So I'm going to define semaphore. So semaphore or stoplight. Yeah, one of the things that certainly the project team is talking about as well is 1st and 5th. We're talking about improvements, of course, not only looking at, I'll call it geometric improvements such as bump outs or curb extensions, but we're also talking about a traffic light as well at 1st and 5th. And certainly we'll have more information as we come to our next round of engagement on that topic, but just wanted to basically make everybody aware of the fact that we are having further discussion, particularly about 1st and 5th, and we'll be able to have more information on that in the future here.
Thanks. I know that was a hot spot for accidents, and I know that is a terrifying place for bikers or pedestrians to try to cross. You feel like Frogger trying to cross over there.
Yep. See Pat Bourne, hand up.
Yeah, hi, Scott and everybody. I live at the Village Lofts too, and I weighed in on the location of the E-line station, but I have a different question. With the proposed change to the triangle and limiting left-hand turns coming from the west, I'll call it, and right-hand turns, and I guess left-hand turns coming from the east and through intersections. Have the traffic engineers analyzed where that traffic's going to go, and is it enough to create any new bottlenecks in the neighborhood? What are the implications of those new limitations on turning and driving through that 5th Street intersection?
Great question, Pat. Heather, you wanna take a swing at that?
Sure. So we did some rerouting of trips based on that elimination of that movement to different intersections in the network to understand what the potential impacts would be at other locations in terms of bigger turning movements, additional conflicts, and just different volume distributions. And there weren't significant issues, primarily due to the lower volume that's occurring on 5th, generally speaking, but it wasn't a significant amount of traffic impact at the different locations and intersection turns that where we adjusted and redistributed.
Did that get at your question, Pat? Thanks, Heather. I see Michael put a comment in there about exploring tabled intersections or raised crosswalks. We haven't gotten down into that level of detail yet. Those kinds of details will come as we select an option, and then we get down into the design of it. So that'll be coming up soon. Okay. But those are definitely potential options that you can use on certain streets, not all streets, but certain streets.
Okay, I appreciate it, because I know in the areas in the city that I frequent that actually has those, it's been rather nice. And recently I was disappointed with the Johnson reconstruction. That's also a corridor I go through, and they had to drop the tabled crosswalk due to drainage and geometry. So it was sad to see it in the proposals and the community feedback, and then engineering wise, it couldn't happen.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Michael.
I had a quick question about a note on the map about, maybe some consideration of a turning 5th Street into a one-way. Could you elaborate on that? That caught my interest.
Yeah, we can certainly elaborate on that.
In front of Gardens of Salonica, between Gardens of Salonica, Conga, Fine Furnish, and Wells Fargo.
Yeah, we might get some help from my friends on the call here, but essentially what we did is, as we started to generate ideas for this, we came up with this idea of closing off Fifth Street there, kind of putting that triangle. We called it the triangle triage, is what we called it, because it's such a hard intersection. And so we looked at that first and said, okay, if we close Fifth, what needs to happen at that point? And so we threw out some ideas about Fifth to the west of this intersection. It could function as a two-way, right in, right out type situation. Could also function as a one-way type of a situation as well, which might allow for a little more pedestrian realm, possibly even get more parking in there as well. And so it's just an idea that we have at this point. We haven't fully vetted it with the owners around that area. So I think there's more to be said on that. Josh or Ross, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think Scott, I think you summarized it well. I'll just add as well, I think one of the reasons as well, one way came up, certainly it's a balance too. We recognize that there's making adjustments to the street network. There's always that movement of traffic elsewhere, but and that's something certainly we'd look at further. But one of the benefits that we were looking at and making it a one-way would be looking at additional parking on Fifth as well. So that may provide the opportunity to provide angled street parking on Fifth, and thus mitigate some of that parking impacts that may be occurring in the area on Hennepin and First as well.
I'll throw one more in there too. That topic of conversation has some spillover effects on the First and Fifth intersection as well. So as we look at that, I know someone mentioned that's a safety hotspot. Converting Fifth to a one-way reduces a lot of conflicts at that First and Fifth intersection too. So not only were we seeing positive safety improvements at the triangle, but that would, like I said, spill over to First and Fifth. Just another consideration that we had.
And to be clear, the one way we were looking at was to the west.
Correct.
Headed westbound.
Yep. Thanks for those clarifications, Josh, Ross, Heather. That answer your question, Scott?
Oh.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, John.
Sorry. Thank you. The plans are out there. I am concerned that they were posted a couple of weeks ago. They weren't shown here tonight. You would have had to already get into the plan, look at the details. I expected on a listening session to, kind of run through the plans of where we are, because I found tonight's listening session kind of where we were a year ago, talking ideas and concepts versus getting down to quote unquote a plan level. So kudos to all of the individuals on this call who did get into that, but I'm concerned that there are a number of elements that were made to the plans, and it's competing. Dedicated bike lanes to no bike lanes to, I think the most important thing is wider sidewalks, so that two couples can walk and not have to turn their shoulders. What makes great streets? Wide sidewalks, great trees, boulevards. The plan, at one of the BR stations, has a 6-foot sidewalk, a 7-foot bike lane, 10-foot, bus bump out. It seems like there's still too much infrastructure trying to be put into this system instead of trying to step back and go, what is important? But my last comment is it needs to be equitable. I think the individuals who live and work and pass through this area, we all drive, we all walk, we all bike, we all take the bus. maybe it's skewed too much to automobiles today, but I don't want to see bus being the number one, bikes being number two, pedestrians being number three, and automobiles being number four. There needs to be a much more equitable placement of all modes of transportation as we work through this corridor. And I'm going to leave it at that.
Thanks, John. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I just want to kind of conclude with our breakout group. I kind of mentioned some of I've got a long history of being the former president of the Business Association here. The business owners have a really hard time coming to these meetings and sharing their thoughts because they're working and they're managing their businesses. And I think getting some input from them directly and not through a formal Zoom session, would be very helpful and very enlightening. I brought this up just in passing with the bartender, the bar manager at Masu tonight about a bike lane going and taking away all of their parking that all their customers use out in front of their store. And it was a guffaw, a chuckle, like why? All of her employees bike, they don't need a bike lane there. I know there's a lot of different opinions on it. And I think there's a lot of great things that are going to happen and come from this project. And I think that we're all partners in this. But I just want to let you know that there are a lot of businesses that rely on on-street parking, and no one wants to admit it. But it is the ugly truth that All Saints and Sondershaker and Whitey's and Stray Dog can't survive only on people biking, Ubering. They have to rely on people driving here and having somewhere to park. We don't have a municipal ramp other than over on the other side. It's probably going to, half of it's going to get taken away. River Place, nobody parks in River Place. It's hard to find. It feels very distant from East Hennepin. So I think what you're going to hear from the business owners and from the business association that is struggling right now from the pandemic, they are at a unique disadvantage to advocate for themselves, really in a very difficult position. They just want to be heard. And this session, I think, is great. There's a lot of really smart people who have really influenced my thinking on this project. Kudos to all of you. And to our partners, this is going to be an awesome kick-ass addition to the neighborhood with all these improvements. But these business owners don't have any voice. And I really encourage you, anything I can do, Hyla, we've known each other for years. I've done this listening session. I'm always here. My phone is always on. Please, by all means, reach out to me. And we'll see you tomorrow night at the Neighborhood Association. Thank you for coming to that. But these guys don't have a voice, and I think they're going to be really concerned about losing their parking. On East Hennepin specifically, there's 50 businesses that rely on parking on East Hennepin. This is a historic district. So I get a little bit excited about that, but I don't want to take away from some of the really great things. And we got to improve the safety in the neighborhood too. So kudos to your hard work on this. I appreciate it.
If I can jump into response, thanks, Scott. And yes, as I noted to you, I'd love some help. And this business association and many others we're working on these days, it's a very tough time. And having meetings with one another is not their priority. The priority is staying in business. So we have a lot of appreciation for the struggles and challenges of being a small business person in general, and certainly during this time in particular. We are trying to do some targeted outreach, and what we're planning here and have done elsewhere is literally in some cases going door to door in the areas, because we can send postcards, we can send emails, we can invite people to meetings, but it doesn't mean they'll show up. Who we get in touch with will vary. We have Mark on here somewhere. If you're listening in, Marcus and I have been talking about strategies to get out and just to at very least let people know that they should tune in and pay attention and speak up. There's some tough choices here, and we understand that, and I think most people in this area do, but we certainly we want everyone who has a stake here to have an opportunity to be heard. So happy to work with you, others, and certainly to be sort of creative in terms of how we get in touch with folks. So I'm open to good ideas on that front. Mark, anything you want to?
Let's be honest, Hyla, they have an obligation to show up too, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's not the most convenient time for them, they do have an obligation. So everybody has to work as a team if everybody's, because we know at the end of this project, everybody's going to be 100% pleased with the outcome, right? That's the goal. I'm kidding.
That's the goal.
But it's on all of us, and thank you for listening. I gotta bug out. Thanks, everybody.
Sure.
Thanks, Scott. Other comments before we close shop again? You know, a lot of information online, so we'll look for your comments there as well. Well, if not, I will say once again, we really appreciate your attendance, recognizing that time is important, not just for businesses, but for people as well. And reach out to us. We've got contact information in there. You can reach out to Josh, Hyla, myself, Luke, Kelsey at the city. There are a number of people you can reach out to if you have questions, or we'd be happy to, we'll meet with anyone anywhere. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight, and we'll go ahead and close out here. Thanks all.